Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Mahoney. I am Chronogram Media's editorial director. It's wonderful to have you all here for the Climate Act, Tackling the Hard Parts. This Chronogram conversation is ripped from the pages of Upstate House, specifically the 4th annual Clean Power Guide, a consumer education and empowerment publication that we are proud to produce with Sustainable Hudson Valley. This year, we focused on jobs, showcasing a number of career opportunities, which are expanding exponentially as we get serious about tackling climate change. In a minute, I'm going to hand it over to the ever-capable Lissa Harris, my colleague over at the River Newsroom, but first, some housekeeping. This is being recorded, so if you were in witness protection, probably turn off your video and hide your identity. This will be published next week on Chronogram Media's YouTube channel and on our website if you would like to share that at that point or come back and hear me do this spiel again. All of this would not be possible without the generous sponsors who back up this work because it is their work too. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, whose numerous programs support these new technologies and help customers get off fossil fuels with incentives and educational programs. And NYSERDA has been a supporter of the Clean Power Guide every year since we started. Central Hudson, our local utility, has distinguished itself by communicating with stakeholders and the public about how the clean energy transition is unfolding. Central Hudson's website, senhud.com, is your portal to learn about clean energy, the clean energy marketplace, including community solar, electric vehicles, heat pumps, energy efficiency, and more. Rycor HVAC is a fast-growing installer of air source heat pump systems designed for comfort and savings, and an enthusiastic educational partner for homeowners. Dandelion Geothermal helps you heat and cool your home with innovative technologies powered by the earth. Water Furnace International is a national supplier of geothermal heat pumps that has installed over 16,000 systems in New York State. Wow, that's a lot. National Energy Solutions is an experienced business dealing in solar and geothermal, air source heat pumps, and battery backup systems. Lighthouse Solar is a widely trusted company providing solar solutions since 2009 and installing air source heat pumps, EV plugs, and energy storage systems. Hudson Valley Green Homes, Marcy Cleveland is a realtor with a difference. She knows all the sustainable features that buyers can look for and sellers can value. And she makes it easy to take these things into account in real estate decisions. Last but not least, New Yorkers for Clean Power, a highly effective advocacy organization supporting the Climate Act, renewable heating and cooling, and the Transportation and Climate Initiative. Their community energy coach, Tom Conrad, has an article in the Clean Power Guide. All of these companies can talk you through your options and help finance the transition affordably. And they are all part of supporting the outreach work of Sustainable Hudson Valley and the Clean Power Guide. Now, just for a little bit of shameless self-promotion, here, this is a collaboration with Sustainable Hudson Valley and also the River Newsroom. And as Stuart mentioned a minute ago, if you would like to support the work of the River Newsroom, I highly recommend you do so. And you can do so at the link that will be appearing in the chat. Ta-da, it's magic, I love that. We are also here at Chronogram Media. We are in the middle of Chronogrammys, our Reader's Choice Awards. Go to chronogrammys.com to vote for your favorite people, places, and things in the region. And I would also want to plug our upcoming cannabis event, Canna Get a Witness, Next Steps for Cannabis in New York on February 24th. We have Jen Metzger from the CC, the Cannabis Control Board, already confirmed. Many of you probably know her for her work in this space before she got involved in the cannabis space. Okay, I'm done talking. Lissa Harris, take it away.
All right, thank you, Brian. And hopefully the length of the sponsor messages is an indication of how many clean energy jobs there already are in New York State. And, that's only going to go up as we move forward through, the process of transitioning to clean energy. So I'm going to kick us off here with kind of a broad overview of where we are right now in this moment in New York State. because what's happening in New York on climate policy is really important, not just at the local level, but at the global level. Right now in the US, federal action on climate is fairly stalled out, and it may stay that way throughout the next decade, which is a really critical time for preventing some of the worst impacts of climate change. So state policy and even local municipal policy is really leading the way on this front. And New York is ahead of just about every other state in the union on this front. And, New York State is a huge economy. So it's, this stuff is important. Most people know that climate change is a problem and that greenhouse gas emissions are driving that problem. But what does that actually mean? There's still this idea out there that we can fix climate change by driving a little less, maybe buying some carbon offsets when we fly somewhere. And it's just not true. The science says we need to stop burning fossil fuels almost entirely to stop this process. And even if we do that, the climate will still continue to get worse for a while. And the bright side of that is that every amount of emission reduction helps. If climate action is a light switch, it's not an on-off switch, it's a dimmer. When you burn any fuel, it releases carbon dioxide, and that gas stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So most of the carbon dioxide we've been putting into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution is still with us. And we're still putting out vast amounts of it to heat our homes and run our vehicles and create our electricity. And in that process, basically double glazing the planet. Fossil fuel systems are also releasing vast amounts of methane, which doesn't last as long as carbon, but it's a far more potent greenhouse gas. So the result is not just warmer temperatures, but an increasingly unstable climate that makes events like floods and hurricanes and forest fires much more likely, that disrupts the agricultural systems that keep us fed, and that threatens the infrastructure that keeps our towns and cities running. And we're already seeing that happening here in the Hudson Valley and Catskills region, and pretty much everywhere else. So there's a pretty solid consensus among people who study climate change that in order to prevent the worst impacts, we need to move off fossil fuels almost entirely in the next few decades. And New York State passed a law in 2019 that requires the state to develop a plan to do just that. It's called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA. And one of the things the CLCPA did is it created a group called the Climate Action Council, which includes a lot of New York State agency heads, as well as other important stakeholders in this space. And for the past 2 years, that council, with a lot of help and advice from industry and community experts, has been working to create a roadmap for getting the New York State economy off fossil fuels entirely by 2050. And on New Year's Day this year, they released that roadmap. It's called a draft scoping plan. And at this point, I'm going to ask Margot, our Zoom tech support tonight, to drop that link in the chat to the draft scoping plan. It is a long and technical and rather forbidding document. It's the main body of it is several hundred pages, and it's stuffed with appendices. There's a lot in there, but the gist of it is we need to start now. And if the goal is to make getting off fossil fuels a smooth transition that doesn't hurt ordinary New Yorkers and not a disruptive, chaotic transition, we need to invest a lot of money in order to make sure that people can afford clean energy, that our workforce and that our industries and our businesses, both large and small, are prepared for the new jobs that are going to be created in the transition, and that they will be good jobs, and that communities are ready for this transition. So a couple of big picture pieces of this. One of the first steps in decarbonizing New York's economy is making the electrical grid zero carbon. And right now we're kind of about halfway there. From one perspective, about half of our electricity in the state comes from natural gas, and most of the rest is hydropower and nuclear. Right now we have a pretty small percentage coming from solar and wind. And to get all the way to zero carbon electrical grid, we need to build a lot of new wind and solar power, and also a lot of transmission to get that new power to areas of high demand, because the energy is not going to be coming from the same places or the same plants. And we also need build out of batteries and other forms of energy storage to cope with times when demand is high and production is low. And the good news on that front is that all of this technology has gotten much, much cheaper over the past decade or so. The tough thing is that it's going to require a lot of space. physically. And that means we need to have a lot of really hard community conversations about rural land use. And if we don't do that work, we're basically voting with our feet to keep the electrical grid dependent on huge fossil gas plants, a lot of them in dense urban neighborhoods that are not only double glazing the planet, they're also sickening and killing thousands of people every year through particulate pollution, most of them in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods. So another big shift that we need to make in the New York State economy, and in general, is we need to shift our heating systems and transportation to clean energy. The good news is that the technology to do that, again, is already out there with heat pumps and electric vehicles. And for the most part, once it's in place, that technology is cheaper to operate. But in order to make clean tech an attractive or even a possible option for people, we need to make it affordable to adopt. And we're going to hear a little more later on from Luis about how the city of Ithaca is moving faster than the state is even on decarbonizing homes and buildings with help from private investment. And I'm really excited to hear about that project. So electricity, buildings, transportation all need to go fossil free. And there's other pieces of the New York economy that the Climate Act will touch, but these are really big ones. And that will all need a lot of ongoing investment to pull off, whether that's state money, federal money, private investment, all three. Another really important aspect of the state's climate law is that it requires at least 35% of what the state spends on climate action to flow toward what the law calls disadvantaged communities. And a huge part of the scoping plan process that the Climate Action Council has been doing this past couple of years has been figuring out how to define those communities. And one thing that they found was that in urban areas, it's easier to draw geographic lines around a community that's poor and vulnerable and has a lot of pollution burdens and health problems. But in rural areas, vulnerable people are more spread out. They're less concentrated geographically. So what they came up with was a definition of disadvantaged communities that includes both geographic areas and also low-income individual households. Those communities and those people are front and center in the state's climate law because they are the people that are hurt most, both by climate change and by disruptive change in energy systems and energy prices. So what next? This draft scoping plan that just came out is going to be the focus of a lot of attention in New York throughout 2022. And it's just a draft so far, it's not final. But when it is final, it's going to guide a lot of state action, both on the legislative side, and it's going to transform how decisions are made at pretty much every state agency, and it will bring change to every community in New York State. And so the task at hand is to make sure that that change is smooth and it is to the benefit of the people of the state of New York. So now that that plan has been released to the public, the Climate Action Council is looking for feedback on it by gathering public comment from regular New Yorkers and from stakeholders in the state economy. And public comment is always important when governments do things, but this process is going to be a much bigger and more extensive process than public comment usually is. They're going to hold at least 6 public hearings, both in person and virtual, in different locations around New York State. And I really hope that everybody who's here with us tonight will engage with that process in some way. And with that, I hope I've given you kind of a sense of the landscape that we're dealing with here. I want to turn it over to our panelists. We have 4 fantastic experts with us tonight, each with a different perspective on this huge, complicated problem. And I'm pretty sure we're not going to solve climate change in an hour, but I hope we will get into some of the tough stuff and have a really good conversation. And after each of our panelists has had a chance to say a little bit about their piece of the problem, I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we're going to take some questions from the Zoom chat if we have some time for that. So as we go, feel free to use the Zoom text chat here to talk to each other and to our panelists and to ask us questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So first up, I'd love to introduce Melissa Everett of Sustainable Hudson Valley. Melissa's group has their own climate plan called the Regional Climate Action Strategy, and she's going to tell us about that and where it fits in with the state goals and what roles all of us here in our region can play. So Melissa, take it away.
Thank you kindly. I am excited and not at all intimidated. So for years, Sustainable Hudson Valley has had this ambitious mission to speed up, scale up, jazz up, and leverage progress against climate change, creating communities where people and nature thrive. And that's put us into a lot of work in the marketplace back when the solar and EV marketplaces were super dormant. Um, we did a lot of education and group purchase work, a lot of social marketing. We were responsible for something like 400 solar purchases and 300 EVs back when that was big numbers. But we've really been paying attention to kind of the social psychology of this and how do you take these pretty much unfathomably big goals and translate them into pathways of action that are like bigger than changing a light bulb and yet smaller than transforming the whole state. Because our theory really is that humans are not that great at pattern recognition, but that as we begin to grasp, oh my God, climate change is real for us, and oh my God, this whole policy transformation is happening. It's not just a storyline. We have to bring it home. So we have worked with a network of organizations, not the most fancy, ambitious organizations, but some of the most knowledgeable, about 90 partners, to frame out what we've called a regional climate action strategy. And it really parallels the state's effort. It's been organized around three big questions. What's it going to look like for us for the goals and mandates of the Climate Act to be achieved? Who needs to be involved specifically? What agencies, what stakeholders, and what can we who have found our way to the table actually do? And it's on our website now, sustainhv.org, with the words discussion draft in the biggest letters. And we are going to be working to expand and deepen this analysis, but already it's led to some commitments to take action that are really encouraging. I'll just summarize quickly the kind of stuff that we've come up with. So with energy, Lissa alluded to all the enormous installations that there will probably need to be in addition to small distributed ones. Scenic Hudson created a decision tool to help communities look at alternate land uses. And in conversations around this process, they and Clearwater got ahead of steam to bring together a pilot group of 15 communities to plan, like, where do you think you should put your renewable energy that won't upset your communities and cause pushback? In transportation, we're not Metro North. We can't tell them what to do, but we look at how much transportation demand is important, how much it's important to help people be comfortable with different ways of getting around, like transit and walking and biking. So we're part of a project actually funded by NYSERDA that will be rolling out. I just saw the funding announcement under the Clean Transportation Prize to look at how the city of Kingston can better do its bike route or its bus routes and transport people to the bus efficiently. There is, regenerative agriculture and forestry is big in the state plan. Forests actually are the biggest thing. And so we're starting to look at what a sustainable forest economy would look like. And my God, timber for building sequesters carbon. And that's a really good way to keep resources in the region. We looked at materials, and if you heard the governor's State of the State address, she acknowledged that 12% of the carbon footprint for New York State is from moving waste around. And guess what? One of the major landfills we ship to is closing in a couple of years. So we really will be doing an advocacy push and a research push for how do you build a circular economy? How do you take all that waste paper and use it to manufacture insulation, for crying out loud? Those are the kinds of things that you know, they're not rocket science. They're obvious to the experts. But what we've been trying to do with this project is bridge between experts and people at the local level through conversations like this, through presentations. We did one to Sustainable Warwick last night. Just really helping more and more people not just get it in theory, but get it as something they can be involved with in a fulfilling way.
And I seem to have muted myself. There we go.
Oh.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, making that connection between, you know, climate change is such a big picture item, and then you know, even at the state level, it can be hard to grasp. So what does it mean for me in my community and my household is really, you know, it's a tough conversation and a really necessary one. Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to introduce now our next panelist. Next up is Ryan Hawthorne, who is Vice President of Electric Engineering and Operations for Central Hudson. I think it might be surprising to some people that even though they're in the natural gas business along with electricity, that some of the major utilities are very on board with New York's clean energy transition and supportive of the change that needs to come, but that is in fact the case. And Ryan's going to talk to us from the utility perspective about the move to a clean energy grid, which is really the foundation of economy-wide climate action in New York. It's kind of the first step. So Ryan, take it away.
Lissa, thank you, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for kind of highlighting that. Yes, we are on board with this. A lot of times, you know, people here, we're the utility and we're here to help, and they naturally kind of back away a little bit. But you know, we are very much on board with this, and I'll get into a little bit of what we're doing at Central Hudson to help kind of further the conversation. I think, you know, up front here, you provided a good synopsis of really what the CLCPA calls for. I'll harken back to a little bit of that just to kind of set the stage. You know, on the energy side, it's really, you know, two main targets. It's 70% renewables by 2030 and 100% emissions-free generation by 2040. New York is in a pretty good space comparatively speaking to other states. You know, having such places like Niagara Falls is a big help to achieving that renewable target. But today we are at about 27% renewables. When you look at kind of emissions free, you know, and you include the nukes, that gets higher. But from a strictly a renewable standpoint, we're at about 27%. The CLCPA also outlines specific targets on achieving installations at solar, so 6,000 megawatts by 2025, energy storage, 3,000 megawatts by 2030, and offshore wind, 9,000 megawatts by 2035. And for us to really reach the emissions reductions targets in the CLCPA, it really looks to change many facets of people's lives, you know, proposing to electrify a lot of main segments, primarily transportation and heating. As a result, you know, based on scenarios run by our friends at NYSERDA through support of the Climate Action Council, the state anticipates electricity demand to grow between 65 and 80% over time up by the time we reach 2050, potentially nearly doubling what we see today at peak levels. When that peak occurs also changes. As much of this change also focuses on building heating, New York shifts from a time when we see our peak occur in the summer to that in the winter by 2035. What's also noted and important, the generation targets that I spoke about that are specific in the CLCPA, quite frankly, aren't even close to what we truly need to serve the change in consumption behavior. The integration analysis done by NYSERDA points out we'll need more than twice as much of that in wind, 10 times as much in solar, and nearly 7 times as much in energy storage. Also identified is a need that isn't quite fully fleshed out yet, dispatchable emissions-free generation. Those type of plants that can adapt on the fly when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, to constantly make sure that the lights stay on. You know, we recognize that as a utility, the electric grid has to meet your needs at all times. And we've seen, unfortunately, in places like California and Texas, what happens when it doesn't. Now, I don't point this out to be the Debbie Downer, only to really highlight that this is really a massive undertaking before us. But as Lissa said, it's also a very important one. And as she pointed out, Central Hudson, as well as all the utilities across the state, are fully supportive of achieving the emission reductions of the Climate Act and are working to meet the needs that lie ahead. For everybody's sake, we need to do this, but we also need to make sure that we do it right. So I'll highlight a couple things that Central Hudson has been embarking upon to move the needle forward. First and foremost is beneficial electrification. Buildings make up the largest source of emissions in the state, transportation the second. Together, they make up about 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions in New York. Changing these areas will require significant investment in the electrical system to accommodate this new load Lissa spoke to building out. We are really committed to programs such as our Clean Heat program, heat pumps. I know our friends at Dandelion are on here as well, to install more than 12,000 by 2025, as well as building out EV charging networks to accommodate several thousand level 2 and DC fast chargers in the Hudson Valley by 2025. Big other piece of this is we already touched on it, is upgrades to existing utility infrastructure, transmission and distribution lines, as well as building new facilities to connect all of this new generation to the grid and ensure it can be transported to where energy is needed, particularly downstate. We recognize that much of the load in New York is really a New York City focused matter, but generation typically is more upstate. This takes time, permitting, planning, siting. Lissa and Melissa both pointed out the concerns around large infrastructure being put in rural areas and just people's concerns about, not in my backyard, which is understandable. The last piece I'll highlight is really our multi-year initiative that we've been going on at Central Hudson around grid modernization. This is really our plan to deploy smart grid technology on our system, allowing us to provide more data visibility and control of the electric grid. We're also in the beginning stages of constructing a new primary control center in Kingston that will really function as the brain of our electric and natural gas systems. And this is really critical as we transition away from what is traditional centralized one-way power generation and accommodate more distributed energy resources.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This is deep stuff, and it's frankly it's been a learning curve for me, learning about energy policy and how the different pieces of the system come together, the importance of transmission. It's a complicated system, and we've inherited an aging system that we're going to really need to redesign in a lot of ways in order to meet the present need. So this is a deep topic. I am going to introduce our next speaker now. We're going to hear from Ranade of NYSERDA. NYSERDA is sort of a semi-public entity in the state that does a lot of work on energy efficiency and renewable energy. And I'm sure a lot of folks here are familiar with their work. I know they personally helped me with insulating my attic. So, thanks NYSERDA. And NYSERDA served a really important role also in supporting research and analysis to the Climate Action Council as they've developed this scoping plan. And Samir is NYSERDA's climate justice advisor. And so, we're gonna hear a little bit about the importance of climate justice in the state climate law and how that's being implemented. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Samir.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this. And I just want to first say I really appreciate the work of Sustainable Hudson Valley and everything that you're doing to raise awareness to build a just green economy. And I really look forward to the conversation with Ryan and Luis. Luis, I thought you gave a great talk at our Lunch and Learn a couple months ago. And I'm glad to connect with you again. So my position, I am based out of NYSERDA. My position is Climate Justice Advisor. Technically, I work for the whole Climate Action Council, which is chaired by NYSERDA and DEC. And my job was really created in response to the passage of the Climate Act. This, as everyone knows, is a transformational policy because of its ambition to achieve justice and widespread prosperity through tackling climate change. And I'll go over some of the high-level points, some of the things that Lisa already touched on. This is largely like the stuff that I'm working on, and I'll get into some of the community engagement stuff, which I think is also really important to the success on the ground. But we're going to achieve the vision of climate justice through the things in the draft scoping plan that that provide options for standards and price signals that will encourage sustainable investment in our buildings, transportation, electricity, industrial processes, land and waters. And this is going to stimulate innovation, in technology and systems, as well as social governance. It's going to make public involvement in government processes meaningful, and it will take a holistic approach to correcting the injustices that make good paying jobs and a clean and healthy environment out of reach for so many people in New York. And importantly, through the reporting structures and including community members in our program design work, we will have the right metrics and accountability. So let me go over some of the key parts of the Climate Act again. Lissa, you mentioned 35% of the spending on climate action. So technically it's 35 to 40% of the clean energy spending. So there are some, there's non-clean energy climate spending, which would not apply to the 35 to 40%. Yet there are other ways that, we can and will target that too. But so it's 35% of the benefits of clean energy have to go to what the law calls disadvantaged communities, which are those that are disproportionately impacted by pollution from carbon emitting sources and by the impacts of climate change. I want to note that the 35% is the investment floor. We're certainly aiming to deliver more benefits in these communities. The Climate Justice Working Group voted on a draft definition of disadvantaged communities last December. It will be shared for 120 days of public comment. We are still working on getting the online map and the technical documentation complete. I expect that to be by the end of next month. The definition includes 45 different indicators from categories of environmental burdens, climate change risk, and population characteristics and vulnerabilities. And as Lissa noted, it accounts for geographic diversity and it addresses racial and economic injustice. I'm really excited for all of you to look at that and to offer your thoughts on it. It's really important also that the programs that are funded, that they are designed to overcome the barriers to community access to clean energy and climate protection. The state also required the climate law, required the state to produce a report called the Barriers and Opportunities Report on how we can increase access and ownership in disadvantaged communities to services and commodities related to clean energy and climate resilience. This report came out at the end of December. It identified 35 different opportunities for us to embed climate justice in agency work. Broadly, they fall into three categories of making public processes more inclusive, streamlining access to programs, and addressing emerging issues like displacement. I'll drop that report in the chat. So our work is going to be to implement these opportunities, and some are already taking shape in both internally and externally. Within NYSERDA, for example, every program has an equity steward. Their job is to focus on meeting their program objectives in a way that advances justice. We're also launching initiatives like the Clean Energy Hubs, which will be led by community organizations, will establish partnerships to effectively deliver clean energy services at a community level. And this is really exciting. It's going to yield great insights, innovative solutions, and improve impact. And later this year, we're also building a steering committee of community members called the Energy Equity Collaborative to work with us in co-designing programs. And this they'll offer input in things like subsidies and incentives, bill discounts, workforce development, marketing, and supply chain issues. I think that will really improve the equity within our programs and make them more accessible. DEC is also going to soon allocate community capacity grants to groups in 10 disadvantaged communities across the state to conduct hyper-local air monitoring. And not only will they measure the air pollution, but the community groups will work with the agency to develop programmatic and policy solutions to the dirty air. And this will be another great example of meaningful community involvement and overcoming barriers to achieving clean air because we're involving the community. And so, I just want to encourage everybody to stay tuned for the public hearings and educational sessions related to the drafts of the scoping plan and disadvantaged community criteria. I put that link in the chat. And thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samir. I have to say, you know, as a rural resident, I've been very keenly looking at these clean energy hubs and you know, excited about them, and also going, well, they're tied to the regional economic development regions, and is mine going to be in Binghamton? That's very far away. Like, you know, how local are they going to get is a big issue. For a lot of communities. And I don't want to sidetrack us, but you know, there's so many good ideas and that are coming out. And I think a lot of implementation is going to turn on how local and how down to the community level, and you know, just how far into communities can this action and these resources go, is just, you know, it's a huge question to me. And that's going to determine how effective all this action is. I want to turn it over now to our next panelist, Luis Aguirre-Torres, who is Director of Sustainability for the city of Ithaca. And Luis is a very exciting guest for us to have, because Ithaca is doing something really extraordinary. Last year, their city council voted for a plan to get every building in the city off of fossil fuels. And you know, it's not through some sort of retroactive ban. They're not coming for your furnace. It's through investment. They've got firm commitments of more than 100 million from private investors, and probably a lot more coming, to fund energy efficiency and home electrification projects. And if you personally have thought at all about insulating your house, you probably know these projects eventually yield a return on investment, but their upfront cost is often too steep for private homeowners and landlords to do themselves. So I'm really excited to hear more about what Ithaca is doing, because it feels like that city could become kind of a laboratory for trying ideas that might work for other communities or even at the state level. So Luis, tell us about it.
Well, thank you very much, Lissa, and thank you everybody for, you know, giving me the opportunity to be here and talk to you about what we're trying to do. You know, we've been sharing, you know, what we're learning with, you know, with different communities. And every time somebody asks the right question and you know, and makes us rethink some of what we're doing. And I think that is the process that we need to follow. At the same time, we have this sense of urgency. We believe that we need to do this now, and you know, we cannot wait for technology to mature more. We cannot wait for, you know, the federal government to come out with a strategy to save us all. So we in the city decided that we should go for it. So and you know, I need to go back to the beginning. Probably I need to start talking about, you know, how it all happened. You know, in 2019, the Sunrise Movement put enough pressure on the mayor of Ithaca, asking him to do something about climate change. So the mayor reacted and talked to Common Council, and then suddenly on June 5th, 2019, we had a resolution where the entire city was committing to fight climate change through the Ithaca Green New Deal. But you know, what happened was the same thing that happened in Paris. You know, we have ambition, then we have a pledge, then we tell the president, he says no, we tell Congress, they don't pass it. So that is the problem that we always have. So ambition is very different from action. And you know, Ithaca is no different. We are a very progressive community. We're a very well-educated community. But if you look under the hood, you know, we get up, we go to work, we go to school, we come back, we watch Netflix, we go shopping. You know, it's the very same, you know, economic activity that you find in many municipalities. And when you look at our Common Council, predominantly white, to be honest, it's really very similar to what you find in many other places. So, you know, it really is and isn't that much of a difference, you know, the way that the community is. But what happened was COVID. Right after COVID, they decided, like, okay, we wasted 2 years, so we need to get going. But this is, you know, well-intended people who want to represent the best interests of the community and the city in general. And they decided to keep the deadline. You know, they were like, okay, the Ithaca Green New Deal was decarbonize the city with climate justice by 2030. So in April, they hired this guy, and I came on board, and the first question was, can you do this? And I was like, well, no, you know, nobody can do that. You know, like decarbonization by 2030, especially if they don't want to, you know, move the deadline. You know, now we had 8 years, and you know, and I was just moving to the community. I didn't even know where to do shopping or anything. So it was like, you know, it's cool. But the mayor was like, well, why don't you give it a try? You know, why don't you just look at this thing and then figure it out? And I did, and it was fun, you know. And on one hand, I you know, it was funny because the mayor got so many no's from me, so I have no idea how I still have my job. But you know, he asked me like, you need to do a greenhouse gas inventory. I was like, no, I don't. like you want full decarbonization, you want me 2 years doing a protocol-based greenhouse inventory. I don't think I'll do that. I can do modeling. So I did modeling in 3 weeks. And we used information that we had available because we needed direction, right? And not so much precision. I mean, we do need a baseline and we need a climate action plan because that's the way government works. But to get going, we just need to have an idea where we were standing. So we figure we have 400,000 metric tons of CO2. And a lot of purists are telling me like, no, that's not it. Like, I don't care. You know, it is something around that. It's about 400,000 metric tons of CO2. And I believe it is pretty close if we use, you know, methane accounting for this. So once we have that, then we start talking about, you know, what can we do to make it viable? And then we looked at, you know, we needed to have really aggressive cross-cutting strategies. There was no time to go industry by industry. We actually need to tackle the problem, you know, in a cross-cutting manner. So I decided, okay, we just need to do 3 things. And, you know, this is the best way of oversimplifying a very wicked problem. So we're going to do energy efficiency across all aspects of the economy. Everything that you can think of, we're going to make it more efficient. We're going to electrify everything that we can electrify. And, you know, in the world, you'll have, you know, an IPCC expert will tell you 60% of the energy stock in the world can be electrified. The rest, you need to figure it out. Well, in Ithaca, it's much simpler. You know, about 85% of what we do can be electrified. Then we need to figure out 15%. So we're going to try to electrify everything that we can electrify, even my children, if I need to. So then we needed to decarbonize, you know, everything that we could decarbonize. And that is, you know, the electric grid. And yeah, you know, in the state we have, you know, depending on where you are, it's the type of electrons that you get. But the reality is that it's you know, part of it is fossil fuel produced. So yeah, we need to decarbonize. And the best way of doing that is, you know, to deploying solar, to deploying wind, to deploying, you know, energy storage. But also we need to deal with heavy duty vehicles. So we need to look at, you know, probably hydrogen. And so we came up with these 3 strategies. And, you know, we looked at that and, well, that will take us probably 80% all the way. And then we figure, okay, for the remaining 20%, we need to do carbon capture, you know, direct air carbon capture technologies, carbon sequestration with urban forests. And we looked at the wastewater treatment plant, and probably we can do biomass gasification to produce biochar, but at the same time produce hydrogen as a byproduct. So we started looking at that. We actually sent letters to everybody. You know, I sent letters to my uncle, to Senator Schumer, to everybody asking for money. And we did get money from Senator Schumer. We did get money from different sources. So we started, you know, a bunch of pilot programs. But then, you know, I did the numbers, back of the envelope analysis, and I presented the mayor the strategy. Okay, this is an 8-year strategy to fully decarbonize the entire city. Every single element of our economy will be decarbonized. I just need $2 billion. And, you know, it was a difficult moment for the mayor. I recognize that. It's a city that has $80 million budget, and it was complicated to bond $2 billion. But, you know, we figured that we could do this because ever since 2012, I had this suspicion that, you know, once everything was said and done, the entire wealth of the universe was concentrated pretty much in financial institutions, in insurance companies, and real estate companies. So, you know, we know where the money is. We know that it's a ton of money, and we know that we don't have to pay for everything. So we set out on, you know, this idea that you know, we could raise the money. So I told the mayor, well, don't fire me. I think I can pull this off. We just need to raise $2 billion. And I gave him an idea where I thought where the $2 billion were. So we did that. And you know, when we started thinking about these 3 strategies, you know, energy efficiency, electrification, decarbonization, we saw that buildings, you know, that's where everything meets. Because when you talk about energy efficiency, you talk about thermal efficiency, and you talk about appliances. When you talk about electrification, you talk about thermal loads. Anything that we use energy for to generate heat, you know, it could be electrified. And then when you talk about decarbonization, well, you're talking about solar on-site storage. And then we saw, you know, there were a bunch of studies, but there was this study that got my attention from NREL about the economic benefits of co-deploying heat pumps and solar technology. And then you go deeper and you see the economic benefits of co-deploying solar technology and EV charging infrastructure. And then we figure, okay, why don't we go for the whole enchilada? Because if we go for that, then we can achieve 50% reductions just with this project. And that project was going to cost about $600 million. And we need about 100 more to, you know, upgrade the distribution grid. So, okay, we need $700 million to get going. So when you think about money, I mean, we have this tendency to think about it in terms of, you know, how much it's going to cost me, you know, what's the interest rate? And you know, when you are trying to do a project like this, and this is something that I learned working in Latin America, because a lot of the time my job was to advise, the Mexican, Brazilian, Argentinian governments of, climate change legislation, large-scale renewable energy projects. The U.S. government would pay for my time, but then when they had the project, the government needed to pay $800 million to electrify rural Mexico, for example. So I learned to work with no money and to figure out where the money was. So I used that, skill set, and went out looking for money. And I figured I don't care about the interest rate. What I care is about the flexibility of the capital. And this is difficult to understand, but you think about it, like when you deal with a bank, it's totally rigid, it's inflexible. It's all about low interest rates, but there are fees, there are structures, there's nothing you can negotiate. But if you go to private equity, yeah, it's very expensive. Actually, it's the most expensive form of capital, legal form of capital in the US, but it's very flexible. You can actually identify that this much of the interest comes with, administration fees. This much comes from, expected return, and this much comes from risk. Okay, you can negotiate the return, you can simplify the administration cost, and then you can manage risk. And if you think about it, all of us who are working on climate change, we need to think about it from a risk mitigation perspective. The risk is extinction, so we are mitigating risks all the time. So this was no exception. We're talking about risk mitigation for buildings. So now that we're doing this, we were, okay, I went and I talked to everybody. And this was a very difficult conversation, because what I was coming to was like, I am not an entrepreneur. What I have is access to a massive market. I have access to 6,000 buildings. So I don't want you to invest in me. I don't want you to invest in the community. I need you to invest in a company that is going to have a guaranteed market to do this. And this is very, very different, because what we were proposing was a very safe investment that normally would be high risk on a company that had already guaranteed a market. So not many listened, but a couple of them called back and say, like, you know what, you might be onto something. Let's talk. Let's do the numbers. And wow, surprise! The numbers began to work at some point, and we were like, okay, if you give me $100 million, I can probably electrify. And it was funny because I realized when I was doing this project that I needed economies of scale. Otherwise, without economies of scale and bulk purchasing power, we're never going to be able to do anything. So I figured I needed 800 buildings to actually achieve these savings. And then when I started working, I was like, 800, well, let's go for 1,000. And then when I was doing that, thinking, this is going to be a financial innovation project, then I was like, oh crap, underwriting, because you cannot have residential buildings and commercial buildings, in the same bucket. So I was like, okay, let's do 600 commercial buildings, because that's when we reach economies of scale there. Also, from a financial point of view. So suddenly we had a program for 1,600 buildings, residential buildings, when everything is said and done, including multifamily buildings, it could average $50,000. And when you talk about commercial buildings, considering all the variations that we have, it could average out to 70,000. So we needed $100 million. So when I talked to these guys and I asked for $100 million, they were like, okay, we can do that, but we need to figure out how to, move risk and how to, make use of some of the money that was coming from the state. And then that was the other realization, the state, oh God, it's super cool that NYSERDA exists. This is unique. We don't have this in every place. But God, is it fragmented? You need to apply for about 57 different grants in order to, to make sure that you are taking advantage of everything that is offered. And not only that, each grant will take you 3 weeks to fill in. And then, normally a lot of the time they're given through nonprofit organizations that use some of the grant to actually pay for, salaries or rent. So it becomes a very inefficient way of disbursing, right? So we started looking at what the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds did. And, they established a subrecipient entity on which you perform a risk assessment, and then they can be the ones disbursing the money. So I was like, okay, we're going to model the program on that. So we're going to create a program manager figure, which actually is a subrecipient in federal government terms. Then we're going to have all this money coming to the subrecipient, and then the state money that is totally fragmented. We're going to talk to NYSERDA, and we did. We talked to them, and we convinced them we need to consolidate this, because if we consolidate this, think about it this way. You have $100 million, and they're expecting a 10% return. But then you get $5 million once you consolidate all the 300 different incentives that come from the state, the federal government, the rebates from the utility company. You consolidate all that, and then you put it in the same bucket. So when you had 100 million and you need to produce 10 million in return, then you have 105 suddenly. So you relieve some of the pressure. You automatically reduce the cost of capital in a funny way. So we were like, okay, we're reducing the cost of capital, then it's all about risk. So we were thinking, okay, if we're going to have a financial product, we need to bring everybody on board. And that means low income people. What that means is loan guarantees. What that means is a loan loss reserve. So we did that. We talked to the state and, you should help us out. $5 million will be enough to provide a loan guarantee for low income people. And, we managed to negotiate that. So suddenly we have a way of protecting against default of low income individuals. And basically, we didn't need to run a credit history on those guys because they were using the credit of the state, which means everything was going to go. So suddenly we had a program that was inclusive. It was around 3%. And then we thought about the last layer. We were like, dude, if we actually provide a second layer of insurance, like, for example, let's say we have COVID again, right? I mean, we don't want that, but let's say that we have something catastrophic like that. What if we were to have an insurance policy for the entire program so we can transfer risk to somebody else? So at the end, what we did was move risk around. The state ended up with 20% of the risk. The program manager, the subrecipient, our partner, whatever you want to call them, they ended up with about 16% of the risk, and 64% of the risk ends up in an insurance company. So suddenly you have an affordable program, low risk, and the key, it's off the balance sheet of the city. There is zero liability for the city, and we are the ones managing the program. So we're beginning
this
to
off and put it in all the other cities in the Hudson Valley. Sorry to
yeah. No,
I think that's the question. Yeah, how do we not reinvent the wheel, but just steal your wheel?
This is cool. I mean, honestly, I'm very excited about this, and I think it could work. I think there's going to be a lot of issues that we're gonna have to solve along the way. I mean, we're already identifying many of them. The structure that we have is already complex, and it's bound to be slightly more expensive. Oh, I'm sorry. I've been talking a lot. I apologize.
Oh no, I'm trying to balance here. I'm like, we could do this. We could absolutely do this all day. And the stuff about risk and financial risk and who bears it and how important that is to getting things done is so key in the climate space. And it's critical for turning these goals into action. And I think I hope we see a lot of news stories come out of your project as it unfolds over, the next years, and, not only what the successes are, but what the pain points are and what happens along the way that's surprising, that doesn't work, so that we can create action that does work. I think this is just phenomenal stuff. I do want to have a little bit of time for discussion, and I have promised our friends at Chronogram that I'm going to let them eat dinner tonight, because if you leave it up to me and our panelists, we'll probably just sit here and wonk out at each other forever. But nobody wants that. So we're gonna move into a little bit of general discussion. I'm gonna toss out a question to kind of get us going, and then if we have time, maybe we'll take a couple of questions from the chat. But I just want to note, coming up on our stated 5:30 shutdown time, so we will try to keep this as snappy as we can. I wanted to ask, just throw this out here to all of our panelists. This, just kind of bringing it back to the CLCPA, the New York State's very large climate goals. This is a really huge undertaking. And as I think everybody who's been with us tonight can appreciate, the work of decarbonization is going to touch every industry and every household and, every corner of New York State. And there's a lot at stake involved in making the path to clean energy as painless as possible for everyone. But this process is dense. The climate goals, the scoping plan, the length and the technical aspect of the scoping plan, and just the complexity of all this stuff that is meant to get us there is still very inside baseball to a lot of people. It's hard to engage with. And, from where you sit, what do we need to do to get more people, ordinary people, regular people who this is going to affect, involved in the process? What do we have to do to get people involved in the process? And how can we make sure that their participation can actually inform the process and, make it smoother and really improve on, on our clean energy transition that you know, even if you agree that this is a good goal to be reaching for, there's a lot of differences in opinion of how we get there. So how do we involve people in the
I
process?
nominate Samir to start because there's been a conversation about inclusiveness in the chat.
Yeah, okay, I'll go quick. Well, one thing I'll say is certainly, Melissa, like I'd love to work with you on spreading the word through your networks. We anticipate that the hearings, you know, will be like in April, and the scoping plan is really dense, but we're figuring out how to communicate it, how to break it down and communicate it with groups, and then get people the information they need to offer those comments in April. And you know, we'll use every tool and resource at our disposal. And with regards to the public comments, I mean, certainly, I don't know to what degree, but I'll be helping to make sure that they're all considered. And so, so yeah, I mean, that's certainly the job that we have to do, is consider those.
And we're certainly going to be like installing ourselves as much as possible as a kind of bridge to support conversations at the local level. I'm sorry, Ramamuri it looks like an audience question.
No. Yes, I was going to say that. So Samir's job is critical, and it's really cutting edge. And I would suggest that anything that's outside of equitable justice of this plan, that someone else do it. Because if Samir's doing the other things, he won't be able to do these things. And the things that he's doing are super critical. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to, just a note to folks, if you have questions or comments, just to please put them in the text chat instead of, because we have so many people in here that we want to keep the audio just to panelists, but thank you.
Lissa, I'll chime in next, and I'll kind of tee off some of what Samir said. In my perspective, transparency on all this is key. Like Samir said, this draft scoping plan is dense. It talks a lot about what we need to do and change in order to hit the stated targets, but it doesn't really talk a lot about how we get the people of New York to adopt those behaviors. And we've got to figure out ways to put it in plain language and put it in terms they understand. So really people really know what we're talking about here, clearly explaining the costs and the benefits of the transition so they can make informed decisions and really make their voices heard to their elected officials. You know, changing people's behavior is hard, and you know, obviously, a lot of the audience here is likely, you know, early adopters or climate kind of activists, and this may be old hat to you, but for a lot of people that haven't been plugged in, they're really just trying to learn about this and understand what it means for them. We've talked about, you know, the several public comment periods. You know, there's at least 6. There's supposed to be 3 upstate, 3 downstate. I would encourage all of you on here to advocate for an in-person meeting or some form of meeting specific to the Hudson Valley. I think our region tends to get overlooked a lot for either downstate or some of the more urban regions in the southern tier. So, you know, for those that want to be a part of this conversation, you know, make sure that you speak out. You know, obviously Central Hudson will be outspoken on this as well, and we'll be making sure that we present our thoughts and make sure that we try to put this in terms that people understand. So transparency and just trying to level set the conversation.
That was wonderful. Could I just make one more comment? I think one thing we learned when we were diving into helping households start to think about going solar, when that was an exotic thing, that people are not stupid. And if you provide something of a frame and some background and some chronogram style, well-written kind of stuff, and Central Hudson style, straightforward information, we know how to do this. But I think bringing people together to bounce ideas off each other and reality check each other is really critical, and that social movements kind of pop when people come together. And arguably, as we're changing course from the pandemic, if we're able to pop out into a real community of practice around this work, it could be fabulous.
I wanted to I want to ask a question about heat pumps. We've had several questions about heat pumps from the audience chat. And, this is something that's very much on my mind as, one of the toughest problems that the state climate goals are trying to solve is this, how are we going to heat our buildings? And that, that in turn is going to have impacts on the electrical grid as well. Because it's like, like Ryan said, it's going to shift when the peak demand on the grid is in terms of the year, in terms of when, when the highest spikes of demand are. And right now, the system that we have, there is some help for people in installing heat pump systems, but it's pretty limited in terms of, meeting the real need for adoption. There are rebates that you can get for a heat pump system, but they're not very large and they come through your utility. And my understanding is that they are different depending on which utility you have. We had a question in the chat also that it seems that the rebate rates for heat pumps are changing in March. Maybe Ryan, you could speak to that also. And we also had a question from somebody who, I can relate to this as the homeowner of a very old, very drafty, very weird Victorian that I've put some insulation into. But, it can be tough to design a heat pump system right for an older house. And it can be tough in places where you don't have a lot of land to put in a geothermal system, which is the kind that can really handle the deep, deep cold that upstate New York is capable of. Air source heat pumps are pretty good down to about -5 degrees, which is great. But, you get below that and you need some sort of backup. So I want to just throw out there, how do we get at the tougher problems of home heating? Because this is a place where it really intersects with consumers and homeowners and renters, individual, difficult, unique problems with our aging housing stock. And, where do you see the pain points and where do you think the solutions are? That was a lengthy question, but
I'll do my best to unpack it. And I think you hit it well on the front part there. Is building stock is definitely a big conversation of this, and Luis obviously dug into a bit that Ithaca is doing to try to solve this big lift. When you look at the natural gas system today, it delivers 3 times as much energy as the electric system does. And if you just switch everybody over to heat pumps, you're moving a big problem over to the electric system. So when you talk about, converting building fuel, building shell improvements and efficiency really need to be a big part of that conversation, and really driving on efficiency first in order to reduce overall energy usage. Specific to heat pumps, I've been popping our experts on the side here because I am not the expert on heat pumps, but we do have those that are. So I can confirm that yes, the incentive levels are changing effective March 1st. This is due to New York's new efficiency New York funding levels as they continue to kind of be depleted as folks rapidly adopt heat pumps, which is good to see. If the funding doesn't keep pace, the utilities have to kind of adjust the incentives to make sure that the program can keep going. We have been working, at least specifically within Central Hudson, to try to keep the incentive as high as we can, and also providing kind of an adder if you decommission your other heating system that you have to try to make you whole on those incentives. And our website does have some of that information. And if you're looking for more, you just reach out to myself or anybody kind of through this chat. I'm more than happy to get you some more specific details. But Lissa, you hit it well, and moving to heat pumps is a hard conversation, particularly when you get into some of the more rural areas of New York where air source heat pumps work very well for a large variety of solutions. But when you get down to the really cold, which we're getting into that today and tonight, it does still work, but it's not as efficient. And that's where ground source heat pumps obviously have a a leg up on the competition, but obviously there's a large upfront cost associated with them, and not everybody's situation can accommodate ground source heat pumps. With Central Hudson, we are working with our latest rate case that we just settled. We actually do have a proposal in there to demonstrate a district heating loop with potential kind of moving down the path of shared source kind of heat pump solutions down the road. I think that's where we may go in the next 10, 20 years. So we will be looking to do a demonstration of that. So just identifying ways that we can try to meet the challenges ahead.
Thanks, Ryan. Anybody else have thoughts? I'm wondering, Luis, if you have thoughts on this, since you're engaged in very deeply with building electrification.
Yeah, I think about the last point, what we're trying to do is to be more efficient also. So, I mean, when you think about, what natural gas does, or propane or fuel oil, it's the most, inefficient in a way. We're talking about 70% waste energy from a primary energy point of view. So with heat pumps, we actually have, with a natural gas furnace, for example, you're talking about 30 to 40% efficiencies at times. And with a heat pump, you can go to 320%, even beyond 100%, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. So it's not a linear increase, a proportional increase really of electricity need. However, there is an increase. Right now, what we are foreseeing is that we'll have 150, 160% of the current load, once we're done with certain neighborhoods. And still, we are, winter peaking in some of these neighborhoods already. So there is need to invest in infrastructure no matter what.
Thanks so much. Samir, do you have a perspective on this, kind of from an equity perspective? The conversion of buildings becomes a very thorny issue when the incentive to save energy doesn't really apply to a landlord. I wonder, if you have thoughts on the challenges in, communities where most people are renting of getting heating technology installed.
Yeah, well, so I'm not a heat pump expert, but what I am hoping is that through initiatives like the Energy Equity Collaborative, we can get into some of the details on designing programs so that we can offer like the right build discounts, and so that we can overcome some of those cost things. Like I noted in the chat, one thing I am interested in, and I have heard from like talking to people on the heat pump team, is that we still need to make sure that we have a significant workforce. And there are a lot of things that we can do within the workforce to ensure equity in terms of access, not just to, to jobs, but hopefully to also like, small business ownership. And that's something that I'm looking into. And, but I would say bottom line, for people who are concerned about the equity pieces of this, offer those comments, into the scoping plan document, so that by the time we really start implementing this, those things could be addressed.
And actually, it was fantastic to see the governor in the State of the State address last week to talk about the electrification fund, for example, to assist low-income people to weatherize and retrofit their homes and electrify. So I thought it was pretty cool to hear the whole package last week, and the budget yesterday or the day before. Actually, it was just really, really cool to see everything that's happening here.
I just wrote a story about we collaborated with New York Focus, so it was me and another reporter on the budget, and it's really a mixed bag. There is an item in there for electrification of buildings, which is cool, but how much is it? It's $250 million over 5 years. It sounds like a lot, but compared to the scale of what we need to invest in order to get the job done, it's really not very much. I had one source tell me that the estimate is more on the realm of $1 billion a year for really, tackling the problem at scale. So $1 billion a year versus $250 million over 5 years, not so much. If we're going to get serious on this at a state level, we need to put more money into it. And, where that money comes from is an interesting question that we have not yet begun to really tackle in a serious way. at the state level. So, people like me will be, asking those pointy questions as we go forward here. But yeah, just to kind of, I want to, there's so much that people are talking about in the chat that's been great. We've had great questions about cryptocurrency, which is a whole other realm that we could get into, that we could have our own panel on. But I want to wrap it up here with just, a general question, which I also saw somebody getting into in the chat. It's about, how do you have advice for just regular folks who want to comment on the process? How do they get engaged with this state process and with the draft scoping plan? The state does not yet have its schedule of hearings out, but they will soon. And do you have advice for how people should get involved?
Well, I will just say I know Sustainable Hudson Valley will be doing something, including publishing some notes and potentially facilitating some conversations. And I know that other colleagues, I see Manna from Clearwater and others on this call, I think a lot of the organizations that have worked together on the regional climate action strategy can make sure that we're accessible and supportive.
What about you, Samir? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say organizations is certainly, I mean, it depends on, your level of awareness and your familiarity with all of these things. But just the local environmental organizations in your community, that's certainly one way to go as far as getting their thoughts on the scoping plan. If you were to just approach it broadly and just look at it and be like, all right, what do I comment on? I would say the scenarios is probably a good way to look at it. Like think about, there's 3 different pathways that we could address it on a high level, and it shows the costs and the benefits. By the way, the benefits vastly outweigh the costs in all of them, but you could even offer comments to the degree of ambition. If you're just somebody who cares about climate action and doing it in a just manner and really dealing with it, then you could certainly offer comments at least on the scenarios, read the climate justice section and see if there's anything that sticks out there. That's what I would say, just off the top. But as we go forward, there should be more sector specific things that you could look at if you are interested in transportation, in electric vehicles. People have put in stuff about charging stations, and if there's particular thoughts that you have around clean energy, read the scoping plan for them if you can, but go ahead and just drop them in anyway. Drop in your thoughts anyway, because they will be there, and they'll, even if they're not something that's in the policy, or they're still going to matter.
Yeah. I have to put in a plug for for my own organization. Read the River. We are devoting a lot of resources, namely mostly my time as an editor and a reporter, to the climate issue, which is not just an environmental issue. It's very clear this is a community issue, it's a justice issue, it's a workforce issue, it's a business issue, it's every issue. This is complicated stuff, but read local media, read national media, get yourself informed on climate change and climate action, and what the problems look like, because this increasingly is not a problem with obvious heroes and villains. There's a few obvious villains, but there's a lot of tough stuff that we have to address in communities that people are going to have differences of opinion on, that people are going to find challenges in good faith, even when they're trying to, really solve the problem, that, there aren't going to be obvious, easy solutions here. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration and a lot of knowledge and a lot of good faith on the part of the community to really tackle issues of decarbonization and climate change. So I really encourage people to, to educate themselves, to read your local news, and get involved, I would say, not just with environmental groups, but also with community groups that are looking at climate stuff, because we're seeing a lot more, I think we're seeing a lot more collaboration in this space between people whose main kind of historical concern has been the environment and ecosystems, and then, you know, reaching out, you know, more and more and connecting with people whose main concern is community justice, or whose main concern is economic development, or is agriculture and soil health and stuff like that. There's just a lot of exciting cross-pollination of people whose expertise is in different spaces in the climate realm, especially at the local level. So there's a lot going on. Did any other panelists want to weigh in on this before I wrap it up?
I wanted to add, I mean, just to say that, you know, one of the most exciting things and, you know, really pleasant surprise was, you know, the partnership with the utility company. And, you know, it is funny because, you know, among activists, the utility company tends to be the villain, but the reality is that they are, you know, they have been our best partners. We've been working with them, you know, every step of the way, and they're very open. They're not trying to stop us or anything. So, you know, I'm very happy about that. Also, the local media. The only way we can inform people, inform everybody, is by talking to the media, because they read the local media. So I think your point is well taken. It's about reading them. It's about working with them, giving them content. And, you know, we've been very happy working with our local media and also with NYSERDA. I mean, when I came here, I didn't know NYSERDA, but everybody told me it's just this monster that is impossible to move. But yeah, it is a monster, and it's a ton of people, but good people, you know, like really good people. I haven't met anybody that I don't like at NYSERDA, and that's kind of cool. That doesn't happen often, you know. So I just want to say that out loud because I think it's important to recognize.
Awesome, thank you.
Luis, I'll just say thank you for saying out loud that the utility is not the villain. I appreciate that. But you know, I do just want to, you know, say, Samir kind of pointed out there's several pathways identified, you know, as potential in the draft scoping plan. And, you know, I want to emphasize that we are very much at the start of a 30-year marathon. And in our opinion, you know, we should not let perfect be the enemy of good. There are many ways to get here, and let's not preclude solutions early on or pick technology winners and losers. There's a lot of stuff out there that can change the game when you look at things like green hydrogen or small scale nuclear or anything of that matter. You know, we should spend the time and make sure that we are really digging into those technology game changers and keep those pathways open, so that way we can do this at the lowest cost possible.
Devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details. I hope everybody learned something tonight. I know I did. And I really encourage you all to keep an eye out for our follow-up, where we're gonna include the transcript from this chat and also the recording of the event. And, you know, sign up for the Rivers newsletter. If you go to the rivernewsroom.com, you can sign up for our newsletter to get our coverage. We try not to email you too much. And I just want to thank everybody that has spent time with us tonight, especially our panelists and the sponsors of our Clean Power Guide and our pals at Chronogram for helping us run this smoothly. Let's keep this conversation going. We're already talking about planning another state climate action oriented event sometime later this year. So, you know, if you sign up to hear from the River Newsroom, you will get more details on that if and when we have a schedule and a plan for that. So,
great. And thanks so much to all of you at Chronogram and the River and panelists. You know, Sustainable Hudson Valley is going to stay in the middle of this, and we think that we're just a few people, but we represent a majority view, and we need to start acting like that.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you to everyone, and have a wonderful Thursday night.